The easiest media product to make is called "This Bad Thing That Just Happened Is Someone Else's Fault." It has a virtually limitless market. So goes a quote from Hate Inc., a 2019 book written by journalist Matt Taibbi. I've heard Taibbi speak as a guest on a number of podcasts that I listen to, but this was the first time that I've read anything written by him. The subtitle of the book really tells you what he wants to share with you in this work of his. The subtitle is "Why Today's Media Makes Us Despise One Another." He sets out to explain how the media works from his position inside the industry. Media and the way it works to inform and influence us is something very fascinating to me. One of the key ways that Taibbi does this is by explaining early on his 10 rules of hate. These 10 rules are: there are only two ideas. The two ideas are in permanent conflict. Hate people, not institutions. Everything is someone else's fault. Nothing is everyone's fault. Root, don't think. No switching teams. The other side is literally Hitler. In the fight against Hitler, everything is permitted. And lastly, feel superior. Once you see these articulated in this way and you're familiar with them, you can clearly see them in a lot of reporting. Being familiar with media tactics is the first step to avoiding being taken in by their profit-driven shenanigans. And speaking of shenanigans, Taibbi was part of the 2016 presidential campaign trail, and so had a first-hand look at how Donald Trump operated during that process. He makes a very well laid out comparison of how Trump's political antics and the media's reactions to them were lifted straight out of a pro wrestling playbook. As he says, take out the steroids and it's an inspired art form, a sports entertainment hybrid that echoes troubadours and travelling morality plays. And the moves are kind of awesome once you get into it. But as a model for either national politics or journalism, God help us. This book was an interesting read, but something that kept cropping up was that he's clearly anti-Trump and anti-Fox News, as a lot of his examples of bad stuff focuses on them. Yes, other politicians and news organisations are mentioned in a bad light, but it was often in the shadow of Trump or Fox. For example, after a couple of paragraphs on MSNBC's coverage, he spends more than a page railing on Fox, finishing with, "The network is now a lot sloppier factually than it once was, having learned over time that its audiences don't notice or mind screw-ups. The lesson of Fox in this sense should scare anyone who works anywhere in the business, because a lot of the Fox business model, if not its political content, is standard practice." Even in an appendix named "Why Rachel Maddow" is on the cover of this book, while yes, he does pick her apart, he still spends a lot of the chapter reminding you that the Republicans, conservatives, Fox News, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump and Trump supporters are just as bad and a whole lot worse. But worse than that, though, in my opinion, is that on many occasions through the book, he resorts to name-calling. For example, Sean Hannity is called a rectum-faced blowhard, and elsewhere Taibbi states that Hannity has a one-note brain seemingly located in his neck, for example. I felt like the ad hominem stuff lessened the impact of a point that Taibbi was trying to make and just came across as childish. It's a shame because in amongst all the bluster, there are some nuggets where he nails the truth on things, like the echo chamber that news channels are, and how the coverage that they present is not things you need to know, but rather things that will trigger your emotions and glue your eyeballs to their product. As he says, Companies are nurturing emotional dependencies for cash. The key is to always report negatively about the other audience, but never about your own. Their bad equals your good, and endlessly spinning in that cycle creates hardened, loyal, dependent followers. So some of the things that I liked about the book were the very good breakdown that Taibbi gives on the weapons of mass destruction concoction that led the US and the UK into invading Iraq. He explains how the journalists of the time completely failed to ask the right questions and question the information that was being put out to them. He exposes how they were basically in cahoots with the government as a result. Their desire to get eyeballs on their product was stronger than the need to present facts and hold people accountable. He then follows that with a really great breakdown of the Russiagate situation and how many of the failings of the Iraq invasion debacle were repeated in this process, and how they were even jacked up to mania levels in the hope of getting the next big scoop and proving that their side was right and the other side was downright disreputable. The media's methods and bias parts of the book are by far the best, but to me, as a neutral observer way down here in Australia, the regular side trips into slagging off Fox and Conservatives and anyone associated with them got a little tiresome by the time I finished the book. Don't get me wrong, he does talk about both sides, but it is clear which side he favours. Overall, as I said to a friend, I'm glad I read the book. Taibbi makes some good points in it, but I don't feel any strong need to track down anything else written by him.